Hey guys, my name is Shanique. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new around here, I create videos on personal development and personal growth. Sometimes it's just me just doing my thing, having a party by myself, and other times, like today, I'm having amazing conversations with equally amazing people. Today's conversation is with the one and only Dr. Amala Luncheon. She is a Caribbean native from St. Lucia and Guyana who now resides in New Jersey. And today she talks to us about her work in emotional intelligence and how that's needed in like everyday life experiences, of course. She is the author of the book, Everyday Lessons in Emotional Intelligence, a Caribbean Perspective, along with Terrain Calendar, and an overall amazing individual. A great conversation is coming up for you. Stick around. And Amala, of course, come make we talk. Right. So as the intro, said, Amala is here with us, Dr. Amala Luncheon, and we'll be talking, like just having a conversation on Comic Talk. And just Amala, before we're going to talk about the book, because I feel like there's so many gems that you have put forward, you and Terrain Calendar.
Yes.
But I wanted to go a little bit deeper first into, the life that you would have had before you came to this point, before you became Dr. Amala. Okay. What was childhood like for you? What was it like growing up? What are some of the significant moments that you remember that you think kind of shaped the woman that you are today?
Okay. Well, I think the first and most important thing is perhaps having a soldier for a father and a teacher for a mother. So that, as you would imagine, it would have been sort of a strict upbringing. So very little room to deviate from, whatever the norm is supposed to be. So I was born in Guyana, actually. And my mom is St. Lucian, my dad is Guyanese. And so I lived in Guyana for a number of years until I did CXC. Then I moved to St. Lucia. Then I went back to Guyana to do my first degree. And then back to St. Lucia. Then, it's been some back and forth. And then I moved to the US in 2010. So I've been here since then. I always knew that I wanted to pursue higher education, but, it comes in stages. So I got done with my first degree, which was in management. And then I thought maybe I liked marketing. I liked my marketing courses when I was doing that first degree. So I went into marketing, did a master's in marketing. And then I ended up doing management as my doctoral study because I couldn't find a marketing course that I liked. That's what it was. I actually really wanted to do marketing, but I really loved the fact that I did management because it's so wide, and it gives me the opportunity to look at things from many different angles. Mm-hmm. And I really like that now. I didn't think that I would like research as much. And now I find myself thinking that I want to be a researcher, because there's so much that you can unpack if you just start. And I'm like a rabbit hole kind of person. So if you talk about something, I'm going to go research it and then I will come back
and
under the surface.
Yes. Yeah. I feel like I only like research when it's not attached to school. Though once it's required for
right. Yeah. No, and
I can't breathe. I'm like,
it sort of shuts you down sometimes.
Oh my gosh. But, I feel like in many ways, educational paths have kind of, mirrored each other. Okay. My first degree is also in management, but I did management studies accounting. Mm-hmm. And then, I was good at the marketing stuff, so I ended up working in that space.
Okay.
But psychology was where, I found that, I really do like that stuff. Yes. I would spend hours researching that. And then as a peer leader on campus or just, always either sent to the Leadership Institute in at FSU, or just doing something in leadership, like emotional intelligence would always come up. But I wanna go back to your childhood for a little bit.
Sure.
At first glance, you strike me as someone that's, very clear, direct in communication. And I could be wrong, but like, what was that like? Like navigating conversations with your parents, like who, they, from a strict upbringing, of course, there are rules and regulations that you have to adhere to. How would your mom describe you as a child, if she were to tell that story on your behalf?
Well, when I was a child, I was asthmatic, and so I was not able to play outside as often as I wanted to. So while my siblings could get to play in the rain or whatever, I wasn't able to do that because I was asthmatic up to probably form 3 or 4. And so I was kind of sheltered, but I read a lot. So I remember instances of mommy saying to people when they would come over, because I was always reading like Enid Blyton and, stuff like that. I was always in those books. And she would say, oh, this house could be on fire and this child would be in a book. So, but I felt like it really was a good escape. I learned to go to the library like as an 8-year-old child by myself. Saturday morning, I would go to the library, get my homework done in the library or whatever. And so I developed very good library habits as a young child. And of course, at the time, there was no internet, so I couldn't stay at home and do that, And that is where I think my love for physical books came from. Like people now can read a Kindle or I need a physical book. I do
too. Even if I have like an audio book in my ear, which can help to kind of manage the pace. Sometimes, because most times I'm reading ahead of the audiobook. I need the book. I need to have it in my hand. I need to dog ears up the corner. I need to highlight. I need to write.
Exactly. Put sticky notes in it. And funny enough, because Terran told me, he's like, listen, why you have all these books? Why you don't just do audiobooks? And I'm like, no, I have to read. The first book I did as an audiobook was it's by Big Magic. And so he saw me with it. He's like, just listen to this book. I'm like, okay. And it was a struggle for me because I wanted to read. I'm like, but are we sure? So then, when I got home now, because I listened to it in the vehicle, and then I found myself going back to the book to check notes and that kind of thing. So I'm not opposed to it, but it wouldn't be my first choice, if I had to. Yeah. So that I think really came from childhood and being in books all the time as a young child.
But then that means that, your cognitive thinking, your critical thinking would have been ahead of your peers. Like, how did you use that? Like, I am a very argumentative child. I am one that pushes, equality. If everybody if dumpling a share, everybody needs to get 3 dumplings. And I'm going to argue my point.
Right.
Did that transfer over into just navigating basic childhood wants? And you mentioned you had siblings on our call before we hopped on. How was that what was the energy?
I think we lived in a very competitive space. So and initially I think I set the pace, and then everybody just wanted to outdo me. Until my last brother came, and then we realized, okay, hold up. There's a new kid in town.
Are you the eldest child?
Yes.
Okay.
And my little brother, he is the one who would do, he would get up in the morning, these are things he'd done in the past anyway. He would get up and run a marathon and then come back home with a trophy. So you could see a trophy. You're like, where did this come from? And, he's like, oh yeah, I did a marathon this morning. Like,
oh, wow.
Wait, what? He did jujitsu. He did a number of things that, and so him going into the Marines was not surprising, because when I asked him why he chose that branch of the military, and you kind of knew he would go into the military because you grew up in a house your dad is a soldier. So he went into the military and picked the Marines because the Marines had the toughest boot camp to get into. So he's like, well, they said that was the toughest. I wanted to see what that was about. I'm like, oh. Like, that is not how my mind works.
And their training is not for the weak.
Exactly.
Because, gee, the stories I've heard, I'm like, I'll pass.
Right. So when I moved here and I thought that I wanted to go into the military, I sat with a recruiter and I said, this was Army recruiting. I said, when would I, so this is me approaching it now with my, as we would say, I'm going to them with my chest now. So I said, well, how long before you think I could use what I've studied? Because I have a master's in marketing. The guy's like, well, I don't know. I don't know that you would use it at all. And I'm like, wait, what? And he said, well, you can think about it, because I had passed whatever test they gave me. And so there was the boot camp coming up whenever. Mm-hmm. So I called my little brother and I said, listen, do you think that I will be able to survive boot camp? Do you think I'll be able to have some sergeant yelling at me? His response is, well, I don't know. Could you? I said, but I am calling you to ask you this, So that's the kind of push and pull we had. And, being able to listen, figure this out for yourself. Ask yourself those questions you're asking me, And mommy's an English teacher. So that, I think, allowed us to have, you had to articulate your point and articulate it well. So, poor English was not allowed. If mommy would hear you saying something and you didn't know she was behind you, then the next thing you know, you'd get a thump on your head like, what was that? But where did you come from? So you always kind of had to be on your P's and Q's. And I don't think I would trade it for the world. I think it was really nice.
Of course. Yeah. Well, so growing up, I had both parents in the home for a certain time. And then for majority of it, of my life, at least, I grew up with my mom. But I certainly remember that with my dad in the house, we couldn't speak Patois. We had to speak English. You had to, articulate your point well, to your point. Right. But then, things changed, the dynamic changed, the relationship changed. Once my mom was the head of the household and she was, pretty much doing, her best to raise us. So I can, relate to some extent in terms of, one, the need to figure stuff out on your own. Like that for me kind of came out of necessity because I spent a ton of time by myself. I'm the last child. Okay. So that brother that would have ran the marathon, I don't know what I run the marathon caught, but I would definitely always be up to something. Right. Always doing something, always have 2-3 pot on the stove at once because I felt like I wanted to explore and experience, get some exposure. In terms of how that background kind of set you up for success when you got to high school and started to, be more actively involved in your peer group, was it a situation where you're the popular kid in school, or were you more of a recluse, a loner?
I wouldn't say I was popular, but I know that when I got to high school, I was the only child from my primary school that passed for my high school. I went to the top school in Guyana. I went to Queen's College. Nice. And the year when I went to Queen's College was the year that President's College opened. So Forbes Burnham, who was the president at the time, he had this dream school where only elite students would go. So once you had passed common entrance, there were 4 classes and there'd be 18 students in each class. So very small groups, and you would get to do things like horseback riding and swimming and music in addition to academics. And it was a boarding school.
Elite indeed.
Right. So my mom, but you had to be invited to go. And then you could say, yes, you would go or not. I didn't get to go because I was asthmatic and the school was out of town. And so you couldn't go. So I remember saying to Daddy, but Mommy's going to teach there. And he said, but she's not going to live there. And there's no hospital close to the place, so we can't send you. And I was very distraught for a bit. And I ended up going to Queen's College. I don't regret it now because Queen's College is the premier institution in Guyana. But I was the only person from my class that had passed for Queen's College. So I didn't have any friends like on day one going in, I sort of was a loner, but then, you kind of grow into that. What I think really made me sit up and realize that there's going to be some competition here is that when my first report card came in and I came third in that class, I did not know how to go home because I was accustomed to being first in my class all the time.
Wow.
And that really shocked me. Nobody prepared me for that. And I keep telling people now, we have to stop putting pressure on children because you come out with great expectations. Oh, you're the only person in your class. Da, 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 da. Obviously, you need to be first in this class. So I remember when I got third, I'm like, well, I don't even know how to go and tell my parents that I did not get first. And for me, it was very traumatic. And I remember Daddy sort of talking me off the ledge because I went home very defensive, saying that, well, I really tried my best and da, 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 da. And they looked at the report and they're like, no, but this is good. Because they're probably seeing, 80 whatever percent and whatever and thinking, no. But what I should have been told is now you're in the big leagues. Everybody else in this school is also bright. That's what I should have been told, but I wasn't. And at 10 years old, to sort of have to navigate that. And at the end because now remember your first term is Christmas. So because you're going to school September and then you do that first term. Mm-hmm. So now I remember thinking, my Christmas gift might be riding on this, all these things. As a 10-year-old child, I don't need to be processing these things. So,
but, unfortunately, that's usually what is used to keep you in line. All right, well, if you don't do good in school,
exactly,
you have not qualified enough to get a Christmas present. Right. And I think
or the one that you asked for,
And a part of that comes from a desire to see your kid do better than what you do. But to your point, like in terms of how that's executed, it does instill like this fearmonger mentality where one, you either always are seeking for validation or permission from your parents in order for you to know that it's okay. And two, like you feel the need to always earn something, work for something, like deserve something, as opposed to it being, no, like it's there for you regardless.
Yes. Yes.
And in your book, like one of the first things I highlighted it in chapter 1, it said the title, "A Man Has to Buy His Own Shoes." I thought about that for a second because I feel like maybe my generation as a millennial is the last where like desire or ambition is like something that seems to be innate. Wherever most of my friends, at least, they have like this unique ability to cue into areas of themselves that they seem to have learned or known at an early age, maybe 5, and execute it in such a way that, like, I call it the hustle game. Like it's on point. But I haven't necessarily seen, once we have started to have kids, I've seen that wane a bit. Because one, if we're even looking at like the basics of Maslow's hierarchy and what our parents would have had to go through in order to provide us what we had, our kids don't need to do all of that. They get presented on a platter and it's really at the top of the pyramid where it's self-actualizing. That's it. That's the top. They don't have to work through anything else.
And I think it's up to us to teach them that, because that story about a man has to buy his own shoes, that's actually Terrence's story. And his dad said that his dad was from Tobago. And so he came from Tobago and had this sort of mentality where if as a man, if you have to provide, so he taught him that from early. And that's how come he ended up being an entrepreneur and so on. But the sentiment is of that generation. And I understand what you're saying now about children wanting different things, because his daughter, he has 2 daughters, and one of them is 12. And at Christmas, she sent him a video of the things that she would like for Christmas. Wait, what? Properly edited and everything, So and what I like too, and I told him that, what I like is the relationship that he has with his daughters, where they would come to him and say, whatever is happening. I didn't have a relationship like that with my dad until I became an adult, really. Yes, daddy was there, but remember, I had a military dad, and his dad too was in the prison service. So
wow,
yeah. So it was.
Oh yes, I'm Taryn's dad. Yes. Okay.
Yes. So now I am, and I was saying to Daddy the other day, I'm looking at like my peers whose parents were also in the military, and none of us had that kind of, sort of chummy. Yeah, no. And all of us are also now sort of independent and fierce and whatever. But now we have really good relationships with our dads, because you're an adult now and you've already like not broken the rules. You've already, you've done all the things, you stayed in line. So,
Do you think that was your dad's way of like preparing you for the world, so to speak?
No.
By virtue of enforcing those, or was it just a matter of maturity? Like,
no, it was a case of him not having a rule book and understanding in his head that this is the way that this needs to be, or else people are going to get out of line. Mm-hmm. So for me, that's how it was. And my mom, because she was a disciplinarian at work, she brought the same thing home. So, being a teacher, it's like, mommy, we are not your students. Like, you can't just, So
Amala, you never tried to rebel a little bit, sneak out a little bit?
Sneak out? No. The sneaking out thing, see, I chose life in that moment. Sneak out, no. But I tell a story in the book of when I wanted to go to this party.
Yes.
And girl, and I was in Form 4, so I think I am 14 years old and everybody's going to this party, everybody but me, So my father's like, if you leave here at this time, then what time do you think you're going to come back? And then I remember when I lived in St. Lucia. So when I moved to St. Lucia, I was 15 and I think I was at community college already. So maybe I was 17 and a friend of mine was coming. We were going someplace and then Daddy said he had a feeling that I shouldn't go to wherever.
The feeling and the dream, like those two things, if you heard that, it was the ends of your going out.
See, I could not go. So now I had to tell this guy that was coming to pick me up that, I couldn't go. Girl, let me tell you. So I could not wait. Both my sister is 13 months younger than I. We couldn't wait to get to university because we were like, listen, see, when we go away, yeah.
And did you do any of that? Like, I remember high school. Uh-huh. So I was a popular student in high school, and most of my friends were not in my grade; they were above. Because growing up, being the youngest of 3, my sisters and brothers' friends, they became my friends. So I spent less time cultivating friends in my own age group.
Yes.
And everybody was older. But that worked to my benefit in high school because I was already socially aware. So I fit in with a bunch of folks. But they paved the way for me for college. Yes. So when they knew I was going to UE, they were like, Shanique, you're coming to stay on Preston. Already put in your application. They know that you're coming. You just need to call.
Right.
And I remember sitting outside in the parking lot of high school, and my mom picked me up, and I was like, "Mommy, this next month, this time, I'm on hall. Next month, this time, I moved up." She's like, "You don't need to rub it in," and I'm like, "Oh." At that point, I realized that okay, there's some transitioning.
Yes.
We're gonna make it on hall. And I wrote down, I'm someone who has to have a to-do book.
I do too.
So I wrote down all the things I'm gonna do, and I said, okay, Shanique, when you get to college, you were popular in high school, you're going to be like unknown in college. Just gonna go to school, you're gonna no party, you're gonna do your work, you're going to, when you graduate, people are gonna say, oh my gosh, that girl was in my class, because you're just gonna roll up with your honors. And you're just none of that happened. By first day of first year, it was a hot mess. And then it went downhill.
It's downhill from there.
So to your point on the talks that you'd have had with your sister on, okay, this is what's going to happen. Know that you have the taste of independence, of freedom,
Right.
of answering only to yourself.
Right.
Did any of that happen by the time you
It sure did. It sure did, because I went back to Guyana a year before my sister did. So when my sister came now, it's like double trouble. It's like, oh, there are two of them. So but you had to maintain good grades at that point. So when I was at UG, I was popular then because one, I was gone for 3 years. So now I'm back. And then people would say I had an accent. I didn't know that I did, but they thought, oh, you sound different, whatever. Okay, fine. But I was doing performance poetry. Nice. So, and then I would get to do anything that, was happening on campus. I was always in the coordination of it because by then I had found myself and I was, into organizing stuff and, whatever. And I was very vocal. I can't say that I know where it came from because I wasn't like that when I left. And I can't really sort of put a finger on like a transition point. But I knew that when I got back to campus, I really wanted to enjoy that experience. And so I threw myself into everything. So I got into the poetry thing. And I was winning like slam poetry competitions and stuff like that. Cool. When I remember when there were concerts at the National Park in Guyana, and I had asked one of the promoters, I don't remember how I got to meet the promoter, but I told the promoter, listen, I need Buju Banton to come on campus and I need him to talk to the students because, whatever. And I got that organized. And that was like it from there. So he came to campus with Wayne Wonder and I saw photos of this. And a couple of them, they came to campus, sat at the head table and whatever, and we spoke. And then when Luciano and Sizzler and that group came, I asked for them to come as well, because I kept telling them, I said, you guys have a responsibility. And I still feel that way about it, so if you're given a platform that is larger than life, then you ought to use your platform wisely. And I told them that, and I would most times I would do like the introduction and the vote of thanks. I would get a gift to give them and whatever. So, I sort of put a little bow on whatever it was they said, when they came to campus. And I really enjoyed that. I sort of cemented my love of dancehall from there because I would go to like Stone Love dances and, stuff. Guyana has a Stone Love as well. So I would go to like Stone Love and whatever. But at the same time, you had to have good grades because you can't go home with a bad report. Like I sent you to school. So all this other thing that's happening here,
It don't matter. For me, what gave me some relief was that first year grades didn't count.
Oh, okay.
As bad as they didn't count towards your GPA.
Okay.
So at the time at UA,
so it was a 3-year program?
Yes, a 3-year program.
Okay,
and when we got to UA, you're coming out of high school where you're accustomed to like everyday classes starting at 8 a.m.
Right.
School. I was usually at school from 6:30 because I'm traveling from far. Yes. And I made the mistake of booking all my classes for first semester at 8 o'clock.
Oh, okay.
And when 10 o'clock, I just waking up to go to class at 8 o'clock. I was like, okay, this is not gonna work.
Right.
But to your point, you said something that you don't quite know when the switch took place, but you knew that you wanted to kind of explore it a little bit more.
Yeah.
I think on my end, I knew, but from primary school, prep school, coming into high school, in a way, at least amongst my peers of the same age, like they felt like I felt like they felt like, okay, well, Shanique, you can't just give us a break, like give somebody else the chance to
right.
out there front.
Which
is why I would have had that conversation with myself for college. Because I'm like, all right, well, everybody else can have a chance.
You can relax now, yes.
Because my friends had already paved the way for me by the time I got there. They never allowed me to play small. So
okay.
How is it? So, for example, before we reach that question, for example, like by the end of the first month of orientation, I remember we were going into a class to prep up, and I was standing with all the other freshers, and we're having a conversation, and my hall name is Window. And for the most part, once you're on campus, people just call it by your whole name.
Okay.
And I was talking with a couple folks, just learning their names, like trying to get into the class, but I hadn't introduced myself. So they're like, okay, what how are you coming from? I said, coming from Preston. They're like, yo, I hear about the fresher down in them window. I'm like, really? What you hearing? And they're telling me stories about myself. I'm like, that is so far from the truth. But I still did not introduce myself.
Right.
And they're like, so what's your name? And I'm like, just as they were I was about to answer, someone walked past and was like, yo, we know one. And I'm like, like, that's you? I'm like, yes, that's me. And that's a lie. Like, none of those stories is true. Okay. But it so happened that by the end of the second month, like I was at every party and everybody who wanted to advertise a party give me a shirt, and I was on the radio promoting stuff. And I realized then that, okay, you know what, if to your point, if you're given a platform or if there's something innate that when you speak, you draw people in, you have a presence, you know, you have a commanding ability where people listen to you and they take action. Like, don't cower that down. Like, It's something for you to explore. Yes, there may be opportunities for you to learn and like, you know, tune it up a little bit and sand it down. But if there's a reason why those seeds are planted, like you're talking about like Buju and Luncheon and Sizzler, like I brought artists, like my brother is a musician, you know, like I bring art. So there's so much. Even though it's the first time that we're having this conversation, I feel like, in a way, I'm like, I did that. Okay, this is not weird at all. But I wanna switch gears for a little bit and talk about emotions versus feelings. You made a very clear distinction in the book. And I'm going to read an excerpt. You said, while they're often used interchangeably, emotions and feelings are not the same. Feelings are things we sense. Feelings come with thoughts. Emotions are as a result of chemical reactions. They can be hidden. It is possible for a person who is depressed to hide the sadness they feel with a constant smile. The basic emotions are happiness, sad, fear, disgust, anger, and surprise. Many of the feelings we experience can be placed into one of those umbrella categories. Learning to identify, understand, and describe those emotions is helpful for the management necessary for the interaction of the self with others. I highlight all of that, right?
Okay.
Because I feel like for many people who are just starting out their self-awareness journey, like that's when they discover emotion, because they're like, I thought the only way to feel was either happy or sad or angry.
Absolutely. Right.
What are these other things in between?
Right.
And how you identify when you feel that way. For myself, like I had to pause. Usually, I would literally stop and ask myself, okay, what is it that I'm feeling?
Right.
It's showing up as anger. Maybe because I don't know how to place it or I don't know how to call it. But am I really angry here or am I embarrassed? Am I really angry here or am I sad that something hasn't and how to make that distinction? I mean, you're a learned person. So of course, you know, that would have happened from an academic side. But in terms of like your own personal journey with awareness, like at what point or what were some of the pivotal moments in your life where you're like, okay, this here is what I'm feeling, and then this part is that emotional or chemical response to that?
I feel like because I always had a good command of English, I was always able to describe how I felt. However, an emotional vocabulary is a little bit different, because you can, like we said, they're just group a couple of things together and people just describe themselves. Like you ask somebody, how are you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Okay, well, what exactly does fine mean? Because I could be fine now, but I could be depressed about the fact that it is cold outside, and I wish that I lived on an island or in Florida, or, you know, something like that. So, but it's fine. But if I say to somebody, well, you know, I think what I'm feeling today is a little bit of melancholy just because and I go on and explain it, then they're like, oh, let's not ask her how she's doing the next day. You could get that, or you could get, oh, well, how did you come to the place of wanting to describe things like that? You know? And I think reading helps a lot. So let's not discount the power of reading. And whatever form reading takes, because I'm not going to knock the audiobooks now, but I mean, because you can hear a word and then go look it up. One of the things that mommy always said, I could be in a book and I say, mommy, what does whatever mean? She's like, go find the Chambers. We had a big, thick dictionary called Chambers. She said, go find the Chambers. And when you find it, tell me what it says. So it's not like you can't half step it, you know. If I'm not going to tell you what it is, and she always used to say, if you look it up, you'll remember it. If I tell you, then tomorrow you'll come back and ask me again. What was that word again? That was a good lesson. I feel like I am more aware now of emotional intelligence and emotions because of the deep dive that I did into emotional intelligence. It was surface level for me for a good while, until when I was picking my dissertation topic. I knew that I wanted to do something that I would like when I was done with school. Because you spend so long working on this topic that if you falter along the way, you could just end up with a project like, you know what, I just need to get out of school. I don't care how this comes out, and you never go back to it. And there's so many people who never go back to their work, and you spent so much time on it, you know. And initially, because I work in retail, I wanted to do work-life balance, because back in 2018, 19, work-life balance was important. You know, people certainly weren't getting the sort of time they needed and so on. And I'm like, yes, I'm going to study work-life balance. And, you know, I started mentioning that in all the classes, doing a lot of writing on it and so on. And then something clicked in my head and I said, but wait, I am going to spend the next 3 years studying this, and I do not have work-life balance. I don't need to hate this by the time I'm done. And then I started looking at what places like McKinsey and, you know, the other big firms were studying. I just went onto their pages and looked at their research work. And some of it, on more than one occasion, I found emotional intelligence. And I'm like, all right, let me do
some viability here.
Let me do a deep dive into this. So I started looking at what industry was saying about it. And then it has to be rooted in academia. So I started looking at what academics were saying about it. And I thought, all right, I can find a middle ground here. And so my dissertation topic was how retail store managers perceive their emotional intelligence influences employee engagement. So I was able to put those two things together, you know. And then because I knew that no one would read my dissertation, because I mean, I had never read a dissertation before I went to study. So I said, you know, I can't just have this information sit here, because I really liked it, you know, when I was done. So I thought, actually, when someone was redoing my resume, I had a professional redo my resume. And one of the recommendations she gave me at the end of it, she said, you know, you should probably write a book. And I said, wow. I thought about it, because before I was done, like when I was in the last stages, I started looking at what do people do with a dissertation. And I had some searches going and a couple of fields. And because I write things down, you know, I had things all over. And one of them was write a book. I'm like, book, I don't know, you know. And then when she said it, I'm like, all right, I saw that. She said that. Let me get to it. And I listened to Terran on radio. And I thought he does a show called Mars versus Venus on Friday on his show, a segment where he talks about male-female relationships and the dynamic and so on. Right. And he always sort of plays like he would pander to the callers, because it's a calling program, and then he would always bring things back to the center. And I'm like, wow, he really understands this emotional intelligence thing. So I reached out to him, and then, you know, we had some conversations about it, and we agreed to do the book. And for me, what I really wanted was to have someone with a completely different perspective, because now remember, he's not doing it from an academic perspective, right? So even though he did some courses, I found courses for him and stuff, he did some courses, and so he understands it now a little bit differently, but he is able to speak to his audience in a way that I probably wouldn't talk to them, one, and secondly, I don't have an audience like that. So, for me, just having someone who can help pass on the message, because what is important to me is for people to understand, as we were just saying, where do these emotions come from? How am I able to identify them? And so now we have a podcast, then we do a live show on Sunday nights, and we talk about everyday things that could get people to a different space in life, because it's important to be able to, we come from the Caribbean where crime is high, and crime is high because people don't listen, because people feel they're not being heard, people feel that they don't have alternatives, and so nobody cares, quote unquote. So if you're able to talk something over with someone or say, well, listen, tell me how you feel before you pick up this gun, tell me how you're feeling. What can we do how can we retrace your steps? If you go at it from that angle, and then in the workplace, it is supported by managers who understand it and who can ask you questions if they see you look a certain way. If, you're not your usual chipper self, they can ask you a question, they can suggest something, if people are able to recognize that, then a lot of our problems wouldn't escalate to the point that they are. So that is what I think is the important part of this journey for me, being able to reach people who can understand, hey, maybe I can take this home.
When I read like the research part of the book, it reminded me of Liz Wiseman's multipliers, and how she talked about, okay, she wanted to identify multipliers within an organization and diminishers within that same organization, even those who may be accidental diminishers,
right?
And seeing how they impact like the success of the team. And I guess a combination of all the things that I've read. For my own dissertation, I'm looking at who are the energizers and who are the burnouts as managers in this post-COVID workplace, because like the traditional cues aren't there as they were before. Right. Like you mentioned something in your book about how I don't remember the term, but essentially, especially in my customer-facing verticals, you're accustomed to having
surface acting.
There we go. And so those traditional cues, a lot of folks have gotten better at masking the way they.
Of course. And right now, literally having to mask them.
Exactly. But it takes a manager who is emotionally intelligent to be able to be like, okay, you know what? I feel like I can meet you where you're at,
right,
and energize whatever you've got going on. And then in that way, you'd feel more valued, to your point of feeling like nobody cares. And then you'd want to stay with us. You want to contribute. You want to connect with the team. So it's as much as like time has gone by, like it's still very much relevant, because like you could scream it from a mountaintop and it still wouldn't go far enough. Like there's so many more people who need, like,
of course,
just the basic understanding of what emotional intelligence is and how to activate that. But what I love is that, you reiterate the point that anyone can learn it. And once you learn it, it's there.
Yeah, exactly.
Those cues. But say, for example, someone is coming in, they're new to emotional intelligence, and you wanted them to learn like 3 things, like these. If you do nothing else with emotional intelligence, understand this. What would those 3 things be?
I would say first, be able to communicate how you feel. So be able to describe it in detail enough first to yourself, so you understand, and I keep saying that you're not an island. So you have to interact with somebody else, whether that's at home, at work, or whatever. So understand how you feel enough to articulate it to somebody. So that's where self-awareness comes in. And then what do you do with those feelings when you get into that space where there might be a gray area? How do you want people to see you? So that's how you would manage those feelings. And then You put those together to manage the relationship that you have, that you're building with someone, or your team at work or whatever. Because I usually say at home, at work, at play, so because we have to remember that the things that we learn, whether at school or at work, we have to be able to transition those things into our private lives and have them be beneficial. Because too often we know people who are like a boss at work, and then they come home and they cash out because they're not the one who that would make the rules at home.
Sometimes, in some ways, it's like, okay, they feel out of control in one place,
and then they overdo it. Yes.
Agree.
So you have to be able to strike that balance. But the first thing is understanding who you are. So self-awareness is where it really starts. So, and you could start by asking yourself, what kind of friend do I want to be? How do I want people to see me? What are my boundaries? What are the things? There's so many things that you can ask yourself. But I think for self-awareness, one thing that you should understand about emotional intelligence is being aware of who you are. And so those are some of the questions you could ask yourself. Then the second thing is being able to express those things. So communication is incredibly important. And in communication, you may want to deepen your emotional vocabulary. So you're not just fine, or you're not just okay. You might, somebody asks you how you do, you say, I am ecstatic, and okay, and I am ecstatic because, and you're able to expound on it.
And it goes back to the home. It goes back to, you mentioned in the book about like when teachers have matriculated out of teaching and the system of teaching has changed, how the end product of like how students are engaged also changed. And I think that can be applied to emotional intelligence as well. Like for me, like I'm a personal development junkie. But it took a while for me to be able to, there were times when I felt something and it wasn't until I heard somebody say it and I'm like, yes.
Right. Yeah, you get the validation.
I didn't have the vocabulary at the time, but now that you have said that,
this is it.
Yes. So being able to adequately, express how you're feeling is extremely important, because going back to like those default emotions, where you're either happy or sad, like that can, change how people are perceiving you, because if that's the metric, if that's the continuum that they have also, then even when you're trying to explain yourself, that's how they're measuring it.
Yes.
So there's an opportunity there for like, okay, misinterpretation, miscommunication, and a whole host of other things. But I love that you noted that, okay, emotional regulation or self-management is not to be confused with emotional manipulation.
Right.
And in recent times, like just the topic of narcissism has been like a trend. It's viral, and every little thing right now is a narcissistic trait.
Yes.
In your research, was that, or just even in your day-to-day life, like your lens right now, walking around and even viewing your interactions with people, is a very unique one, because it's first coming from that emotional intelligence.
Absolutely.
And so in that interaction with people, how is that something that you encounter where you have persons in maybe whether in your space at work or just people you have encountered that either are narcissists or have narcissistic traits, and how have you managed those like relationships? Because in my mind, narcissism means that you're not even aware. There's this cognitive dissonance that's taking place.
Right.
It's showing up that way.
I think that Terran encounters the narcissism more than I do, because he works in an artistic space. And people who have, let's say, authority over creatives sometimes tend to default to narcissism so that they get their own way, not understanding that, they just don't understand it. Let's just say that. But if you're aware and you understand how they're acting, then you can manage yourself so that you manage them. And I always tell people that there's an opportunity to manage up. So don't think that because somebody's your supervisor or because somebody's the CEO or whatever, you can't manage them. No, you can absolutely set boundaries. And your boundaries would be how you are managing them. I would not say, and we have to understand that sometimes when people are being narcissistic, they're doing it from an attention grabbing or the intent to attention grab.
Mm-hmm.
So what they want is to be seen as the big dog always, or the one who is in charge, like I am in charge in this relationship. And it could be coming from a place of them not having experienced sufficient emotions that they could describe from a younger age. And so now they've got a person where they think that this person really likes them. And so the only way to keep this person is to put them in a little bubble and then break them. So they think that no one else would love them, because generally that's where narcissism comes from. Like, listen, you're in this job and I am the only person who's going to hire you. So don't think that you could leave here and go someplace else. And you mightn't say it like that, but you treat people like that. And similarly in relationships and even in families, because, now that we're talking to people about it, people are messaging me and saying, well, can you talk to my family? Like, hold on, let me give you the tools to do that yourself so that because I am not fixing the problem. If I teach you how to do it, then, you can stand up for yourself and say, listen, what you did, I really didn't like it. I didn't talk about it yesterday because I didn't have the words to talk about it and I didn't want to cry and, whatever. But, really, this is how it made me feel. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say anymore because I really don't want to break down now, but I just want you to think about that. And you go. You would leave them stunned. And then they would be like, oh, wow, they're on to me. Or, well, I didn't realize that that's how I was coming across. And maybe I do need to get some help. Mm-hmm. So you have to give people tools to help themselves if that's what they want to do. Because not everybody wants to get it. Like, listen, you know what? I only have 5 more years on this job or, whatever. And people sort of rationalize the events away when you have an opportunity to improve the quality of your life by trying to fix it. But people sometimes opt for just satisfying, let's just gloss over it.
Yes, indeed. Because a part of identifying the problem, like one means that you have to be proactive now in fixing it. And that's where it comes in. Like, most people talk about like this surfacing in marriages, but any relationship, like once you're committed to that person, would continue. Like my definition of a marriage is like 2 vehicles head on, and you're like constantly smashing. Because the moment you say, okay, we have dealt with abandonment issues with daddy or mommy or whatever the case may be, there is another thing that's going to come up.
Well, that I would not attract that sort of thing because, and if you're doing all this developmental work, then that you should not have your mind.
That's true. But I mean, Amala, it doesn't take away from the fact that it's hard.
Marriages work. But so is a friendship. And so is your relationship with your sister and your relationship with your brother. It's all work because we are all growing, one at a different pace, sometimes in a completely different space. So your influences are different from mine. Mm-hmm. So, if like my brother's in the military, I mean, I can't go to them with some kind of little soft thing. They're like, the only easy day was yesterday. I'm like, you know what?
Are you the only girl?
No, I have a sister.
Oh yes, of course.
So you have to understand what other people are dealing with. So when you go to people for advice, like I take a lot of advice from my younger brother. I ask him stuff, and he would. I would think that he perhaps didn't think of it, and he gives me an answer. I said, Travon, you answered me too quickly for that to be. Tell me how you arrived at that. And he's like, well. And he would say like 10 things, and that is why you should. I'm like, oh, you did that
reciprocated though, because like I between you and your brother, because like I can tell that you really admire him and just how he's been able to like navigate.
Absolutely.
And I love the fact that you're so open to like hearing what he has to say, because oftentimes, like, especially, I know in my family growing up, hierarchy was a thing. Okay, like if my father has $10, my brother's getting 5, my sister's getting 3, and I'm getting 2.
Right.
And when you ask why, well, he's a boy and he's the oldest. She's a girl, and you don't need more than $2. Why you need $2?
Right.
It took a while, and I think it wasn't until there was like distance and time between even my brother and myself, even though we're like 6 years apart, where he got to see me differently. Because I think that even though, yes, I was getting older, in his mind, I was stuck at 12.
Baby sister, yes.
Yeah, I'm the baby sister. So by the time he got to see me, okay, as a wife, as a mom,
right,
as somebody who's running my own household,
yes,
as an entrepreneur, as a student. Like, he came to spend 3 months with me, and by the time he went back home, he was like, Shanique, I'm not gonna lie. I never want to say this when I was around you, but you changed my view of life.
Right.
And for me, like, it felt good to be acknowledged by my brother, like an older brother, because it gave credence to what I was doing. Yes, I was leading people, and I hear that all the time, but it's different when it comes
from home, when it comes from home.
Yeah, but in the same breath, like, as an older sibling, like, you're expected to be able to
have all the answers.
Wisdom. Exactly. Yes. Do you think that your brother sees you that way, in terms of, is he coming to you for, life advice?
No, not much. I mean, we have discussions, but I don't think he comes to me saying, well, what would you do in this case or whatever. Yeah. And he has had, his training is different, and he's always had that sort of self-reliant and resilient mentality. So this is a child who'd been playing chess from the time he was in Form 1. So he was 10 and playing chess, right? So his strategy is, I mean, we all had the same upbringing. So now when he was deployed recently, and I was teaching his 6-year-old to play chess. I said, by the time your dad comes back, you have to be able to play. But of course, a 6-year-old is on the phone with his dad. Oh, daddy, look, auntie bought me this. I'm like, that was not the point of this thing. You're supposed to surprise your father. But he's had, and I guess being a boy and, going out into the military, I would say at a young age, because he was in the cadet corps and so on. So you had those influences and guys around you training you in probably the ways of manhood and whatever. And then if you had units to lead, you're making decisions for your unit from a young age, and then he went into, he did management, then logistics, and then law. So, he always had that sort of ability to reason and to, so I ask him a lot of stuff. Similar with Taryn. Taryn is younger than I am, and Taryn reminds me a lot of Travon. So I would call him and say, listen, I'm thinking da 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 da. And he's like, no, I said, did you think about that? Yes. And this is why. I'm like, oh my goodness. So it's like Travon,
like 3.5 seconds.
Yes. And I told him that because, sometimes, often we don't validate men as much as we should, and for a man to hear someone who is more educated and someone who's older saying, listen, this is why I like our conversations. You are able to do da-da-da, and you break it down for them. Trust me, people are not doing that on a daily basis. And it takes nothing to just validate someone and give them some reassurance, like, you're on the right track. And this is why, And Leon is the same way. I have some good talks with your brother. He was like the baby in the band in Roots, yeah. But he was also around, like Stevie went to Howard, and Jeff went to UE and so on. So he was around a good cadre of people, Yeah. But being the baby in the group, I am happy with the relationship that he and I have, because I could call him and say, Leon, this is what I was thinking, That's
the irony, right? Yeah. Because to the outside world, like, Alex phone keep constantly ring off, like, when he can talk about, like, just his relationship with women in particular,
right?
I'm like, there is a particular reason why they reach out to you, because he has a sensitive side that's like, it's so easy to connect with and just have that conversation. Mm-hmm. But then as a sibling, that dynamic was not the same. It was do what I said, become safe to do it.
Yes.
And as somebody who was constantly argumentative, constantly pushing back, like, you know, it took maturing for our relationship to kind of blossom in that way. So no, it's like, okay, I feel like as much as I've had persons who, you know, are older or more educated, but like, yes, validate, it meant nothing, you know, compared to having that come from my brother.
Yes. No, it's important. It's important.
Yeah. So if you were to look back at 10-year-old Amala, the one who just passed common entrance and just got 3rd place in class, and, you know, say something to her right now based on what your life has been like and how, you know, maybe, you know, knowingly or unknowingly, it took the perfect path to, you know, the work that you have done and how many lives you have impacted and continue to impact. What would you say to her?
I would say, listen, you're going to figure this out and it's going to be okay. It's going to be all right. You're on the right path. I would perhaps not be so hard on myself in terms of, you know, academics. But I just didn't know any better. So, you know, and I think now that I'm on this side of it and I understand how to guide people through it, I do that as if they asked me. You know, I give people unsolicited advice all the time. So, you know, I'm always telling somebody what they need to tell their 10-year-old daughter and, you know, how their 12-year-old daughter needs to think about this. And, you know,
to that point, my child turns 11 this year, and every year is like, I'm not ready. I'm not ready. I remember Abby was like 6 years old. No, about 6. And she told a lie. She got punishment. She said, no electronics for a day, and you have to write some lines. And Alex was staying with us at the time. And I usually go to bed by 9 o'clock. I'm a grandma. But Alex is accustomed to, you know, being up late at night, them having more relationship and reasoning. So he's staying up with her.
Yeah.
And at 10 o'clock, she asked him, I said, Uncle, are you staying up? You're going to stay up with me? And he was like, what's going on? Like, why are you pushing the stay up part? You know? And at 11:59, my child went and plugged in the television, waited until 12 o'clock to say, it's a new day.
She could watch
I am off punishment. I'm gonna watch TV.
Right.
So that's 6.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So at 11, it's like, no one can prepare me. Like, even no amount of book when we read, by the time the tests come, I have to be like, give me a minute. Let me confer with my sources, because I'm certain there's a way here. And Terry talks about the dating situation.
Yes.
And I'm like, that's the perfect answer. You cannot fight them right away. You have to agree and then reason it out. I love that because, like, ultimately, it's like, no, I understand why my mother would say, we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
To
like
it,
the bandwidth, the mental acuity that's required to reason.
Yes.
Not easy at all.
But
so
you also have to give the children the vocabulary to express what they need to express. True. You have to tell them. And I mean, like my 6-year-old nephew, I mean, he is very good with expressing his emotions, and I don't understand how he understands those things, you know, because one time we were supposed to be on a call, his dad was supposed to be on, and this was very early in the pandemic, and he's looking at the screen. He's like, but daddy's not on this call. So I said, no, daddy told me he couldn't be on the call. So he says, but I don't understand. I spoke to daddy this morning. I said, yes, but it's now afternoon. And daddy said he would not be in a place where he could get on the call. So he makes a face. I said, well, are you sad? So he's like, no, I'm not sad. I'm confused. And I'm like, wow. because for him to be able to articulate the difference, so we have to equip them. And children are sponges. So if they hear you saying things, then they begin to understand how to use them. And you're not sad for everything. No, I'm not sad. I just don't understand why he's not on this call, because I spoke to him and it's the same day in his mind,
And he told me he would be here.
Yeah. So like, what are we doing? So I think being able to equip children is what is important, and not see them as, because yes, she's 11, but she's a little person. So she has her own ideas and her own designs on her life, and she already knows what she's going to do and what she's not going to do and so on. And you just have to give her the vocabulary and the space to deal with it.
That's so, I mean, like every time I want to close off a conversation, there's a question. But I mean, I remember a couple years ago. So there's one thing when you're accustomed to, and I think for a lot of millennials who got a constant validation, when you're accustomed to, being the smartest person in the room, or having all the ideas, or constantly leading, or that's the role that you've had all your life. When it's time for you to become a parent, I remember the day when I realized that my daughter could lead. Like, I know that this is a dynamic that I joke about with my friends all the time, but my mom will tell people how I'm a manager for everybody else, and I can't manage her. I can't say, "Mommy, like, do it this way." No. I said, "But how come you can't tell people all of this about me, but you don't trust me enough to do it for you?"
Right.
And I remember she paused at that question. But it wasn't until like I realized what was happening with my own relationship with Abby that I was like, oh, like I actually have to step back. Like I have to say, all right, go. And I remember we were going to buy a gift for her cousin's birthday. We got into the store. It's in Walmart. We're heading to the back, but we're on a time crunch. And she was like, "Mommy, I know the way. I know." And I'm like, even in that moment, I was like, okay, show me. And my worldview has forever changed. My relationship with her has forever changed. Because the moment I stopped and allowed her to do it, like she take that responsibility seriously. Like she go in, and I'm like, okay. I realized that, you know what, if more parents would recognize that by stepping back, you're not out in your shine.
Right. No, you're not.
But you are allowing your children to demonstrate what they've seen you do so amply, what they're watching you doing, they're doing it keenly. They want to be like you. Give them a chance to show it and, encourage that kind of thing. It might not be what you want to do or in the way that you would do it, to your point of and them having their own ideas, but it will get done, and it will get done well. They just need the space to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Amala, it has been an amazing conversation.
Yes, I really enjoyed it.
Not that I expected anything less. And you've certainly reinforced a lot for me, as opposed, and even, taught me, a lot of stuff that I just wasn't even thinking about. Thank you so much.
You are absolutely welcome, Shanique. I really enjoyed being here.
I did too. For you guys who are watching, and you just got this far in the conversation, if you want to pick up a copy of Dr. Amala's book, Everyday Lessons in Emotional Intelligence, I'll leave a link to the Amazon space where you can find it in the description box. And for everybody else, thank you so much for tuning in for another episode of Comical Talk, and we'll see you on the next one. What good. Oh my gosh.